The city was quiet that night in Saudi Arabia. The streets were clean and bright, but the silence felt heavy, like something unseen was watching. In a small rented room behind a tailor shop lived a man named Eliam Farouk. He was not loud. He did not shout. He did not wear special clothes. He spoke softly and walked slowly. Many people passed him every day and never noticed him at all. Eliam had come to the country years earlier for work. He repaired old radios and small machines. He fixed broken things. That was what people knew him for. But some also knew another side of him. They knew he prayed quietly. They knew he listened when people cried. They knew he believed that God still answers prayers. One evening, a woman named Maryam Nasser came to the tailor shop after closing time. She held the arm of her younger brother, Yusef. Yusef had been blind since he was a child. Doctors had examined him many times. Some said nerves were damaged. Some said nothing could be done. Maryam did not come for a miracle. She came because she heard Eliam listened kindly and prayed without asking for money. Inside the small room, there was only one light bulb. The air smelled of oil and dust. Eliam offered them water. He did not promise anything. He did not touch Yusef's eyes. He only listened as Maryam spoke, her voice shaking. Eliam asked Yusef one simple question. Do you want me to pray for you? Yusef nodded. They bowed their heads. The prayer was short. There was no shouting, no drama, just quiet words asking God for mercy and help. When the prayer ended, nothing seemed to happen. Everyone stood still. Then Yusef spoke in a small voice. He said he could see light. Not clear shapes, just light. Maryam froze. Eliam said nothing. He only asked Yusef to take a step. Yusef stepped forward and reached out, touching the table. He laughed and cried at the same time. He said he could see shadows and colors. No one shouted. They were afraid. In that country, fear comes before joy. Maryam covered Yusef's mouth and whispered for him to be quiet. They left quickly, saying nothing more. But stories do not stay quiet for long. Within days, neighbors noticed changes. Yusef walked without help. He recognized faces. People asked questions. Maryam tried to avoid them, but people talk. Soon, others came to Eliam's room. He never called them. They came on their own. Some asked only for prayer. Some came out of curiosity. Eliam always did the same thing. He listened. He prayed simply. He never claimed power. He never said he healed anyone. Still, word spread. In places like this, rumors travel faster than truth. Someone told authorities that illegal religious meetings were happening. Someone said a man was claiming miracles. Someone said foreign beliefs were being spread. The words grew bigger each time they were repeated. One morning before sunrise, there was a hard knock on Eliam's door. Not a normal knock, a loud, sharp one. When he opened it, men stood there with serious faces. They did not shout. They did not explain much. They told him to come with them. Eliam locked his door calmly. He took nothing with him. As he walked into the early light, people watched from behind curtains. No one spoke. Fear held their tongues. Later that day, Yusef tried to visit Eliam's room. The door was sealed. Maryam felt her heart sink. She knew something terrible had begun. Eliam sat alone in a white room for hours. No clock, no window, just silence. He did not know the charges yet. He only knew that praying quietly had somehow become louder than he ever meant it to be. And outside those walls, a question had started to burn in many hearts. If a prayer brought light to blind eyes, why did it bring chains to the one who prayed? The answer was coming, slowly, painfully. Days passed, and the small city seemed to hold its breath. Inside the cold, stark walls of the government building, Eliam Farouk sat on a metal chair. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant. He had no notebook, no radio, nothing to remind him of the world outside. Only the echo of silence and the weight of waiting. He did not pace. He did not frown. He bowed his head and whispered prayers quietly in his heart, the only freedom left to him. The guards came in twice a day. They brought food without speaking. They brought water without smiling. And slowly, Eliam began to understand the full weight of what had happened. The authorities had heard the stories that no one could verify, yet the words had grown like wildfire. People claimed a blind boy could see. Others claimed Eliam had performed miracles. Some whispered of magic. Others called it a threat to the system. None of it mattered whether it was true or not. In that place, fear of belief itself was the crime. Meanwhile, outside the walls, Maryam and Yusef waited in silence. They could not speak openly. Neighbors watched them with wary eyes, afraid that just asking questions might bring danger. Every morning, Maryam went to Yusef's side and helped him practice walking. Yusef's laughter had returned. It was small, but it filled the quiet alleyways like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Do you think they will let him go, sister?" Yusef asked one morning, his fingers brushing against the wall for balance. Maryam did not answer. She only held his hand tightly, feeling the warmth of hope and fear mixed together. Inside the detention center, Eliam's first hearing was held. He was not allowed a lawyer of his choosing. The room smelled of polished wood and official fear. Faces around him were serious, some cold, some almost curious. The judge's eyes never left Eliam. The accusations were vague, but heavy, spreading foreign beliefs, performing unauthorized gatherings, inciting people through miraculous claims. Eliam did not argue. He only spoke clearly. "I have done nothing to harm anyone. I pray quietly. I help those in need. I never asked anyone to believe in me. Only in God." The room was silent for a long moment. A young man at the back whispered something that made the older officials frown. The words were carried to ears that wanted proof, but proof was scarce. A blind boy's eyes, a few grateful neighbors, the quiet room behind a tailor's shop. These were all the evidence, and yet in a system that feared whispers, even whispers could become thunder. That night, Eliam lay on the hard floor, thinking of the boy he had prayed for, thinking of Maryam, thinking of the thousands of prayers he had sent into the world over the years. He felt a mix of fear, hope, and something stronger, a calm certainty that he had done what he was meant to do. "God knows," he whispered to the empty room. "God sees everything." Meanwhile, Yusef could see clearly now, but he sensed the danger his family and the kind man faced. He remembered the fear in Maryam's eyes when they had left the tailor's room, the way neighbors watched silently, the way the world outside had suddenly turned heavy with judgment. And though he could now see faces, he could not see the path ahead. It was unclear, dangerous, and full of shadows. The following days brought new tension. Authorities questioned neighbors, friends, even strangers who had heard about Eliam. Some lied to protect themselves. Some spoke cautiously, afraid of the consequences. Yet through it all, the story of the blind boy who could now see refused to die. It grew quietly, like a stubborn flower pushing through cracked stone. One evening, a young officer entered Eliam's cell. Unlike the others, he did not carry a folder or a list of rules. He only asked, softly, almost reluctantly, "Do you really make people see?" Eliam looked at him calmly. "I do not make anyone see," he said. "I pray, and God does what he wills." The officer nodded slowly. He did not speak again, but Eliam sensed the question would haunt the halls far longer than his voice could. Outside, Maryam whispered to Yusef as they watched the sun set behind tall walls, "No matter what happens, remember, he gave you a gift. Light, something no one can take away." Yusef clutched her hand tightly. "Then we will wait," he said. "We will wait for him." And somewhere deep in that city, the tension was thick. One prayer had brought sight to a blind boy. One prayer had brought chains to a quiet man. And everyone knew the story was far from over. The courtroom was tense, almost unbearably so. The air smelled of polished wood and worn leather. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, but it did nothing to lighten the weight inside. Eliam Farouk entered calmly, his hands folded in front of him. His eyes, steady and unwavering, met no one's gaze for too long. Around him, officials whispered quietly, papers shuffled, and the silence of anticipation pressed down like a heavy stone. The judge, a tall man with a sharp face, began the proceedings. "Eliam Farouk," he said, voice echoing in the high room, "you are accused of performing unauthorized religious practices and spreading foreign beliefs that endanger public order. How do you plead?" "I have done nothing to harm anyone," Eliam replied simply. "I pray, I listen, I help those in need. That is all." His voice was calm, soft, but carried a firmness that made the judge pause. The prosecution called witnesses first. Some were neighbors, speaking cautiously. Some were strangers who had heard the story. One elderly woman described seeing a blind boy suddenly recognizing her face. Her voice trembled. I saw him see, she whispered. I do not understand it, but it happened. A man from a nearby market claimed he saw Yusef walking freely where he had never walked before. Others nodded silently, eyes flicking nervously toward the judge, unsure if truth could survive the tension in the room. When Eliam was called to speak in his own defense, he said only what he had said before. I have never forced belief on anyone. I only pray. I ask God to help. He looked directly at the blind boy's sister, Maryam, in the gallery. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. Her eyes glistened, not with fear, but with a fragile hope that refused to break. The prosecution grew frustrated. They demanded witnesses who could confirm that a miracle actually happened, who could show medical proof. But proof is slippery. Doctors had records of blindness. There were no records of sudden sight. And yet, Yusef's eyes were open. He could walk. He could describe the world. Even a skeptical observer would notice the change. Outside the courthouse, people whispered. Neighbors watched cautiously from windows. Friends and strangers alike wondered quietly. If one man could pray and bring light to a blind child, what else could happen? Fear and awe mingled. Some were inspired. Some were angry. Some simply stayed silent, afraid to speak. Inside, the young officer who had questioned Eliam days earlier returned, watching quietly from the back of the room. He seemed torn. He wanted to dismiss the boy's recovery as coincidence. He wanted to leave Eliam's actions unnoticed. But he could not ignore the change in Yusef. And deep down, he felt a stirring in his own heart he could not explain. The trial stretched for hours, then days. Every witness, every word, every small gesture added to the tension. The courtroom became a stage for something larger than law, faith, fear, and human hearts searching for answers in a world that demanded proof for everything. At night, Eliam lay on a thin mat in a small room behind the courtroom. He closed his eyes and imagined Yusef running through open fields, sunlight on his face. He prayed for courage, for wisdom, for mercy. God, he whispered, whatever comes, let your will be done. Maryam and Yusef waited outside, among the silent crowd of watchers. Maryam's eyes were dry but heavy with worry. Yusef's hand remained in hers, strong and unshakable. He had seen light, but he did not yet know if the one who brought that light would be allowed to walk freely in the world again. And the city held its breath, as if even the wind had stopped moving, waiting for the judgment that could change lives forever. The sun had barely risen when the city awoke to whispers. News of the trial had spread far beyond the courthouse walls. Merchants in the market spoke in hushed tones. Children pointed at the tall building where Eliam was held. Even those who had never met him felt a pull in their hearts, a mixture of fear, awe, and curiosity. Somehow, the story of one man's quiet prayer had begun to ripple like waves across the city. Inside the courtroom, tension had reached a point that no one could ignore. Eliam sat quietly, his hands folded, his eyes steady. But around him, the room was alive with unease. Some officials were nervous, unsure how to handle a situation they could neither fully explain nor control. The prosecution brought in new witnesses, scholars, doctors, and men of authority, each trying to disprove what they could not touch, the light in Yusef's eyes. Yusef was brought in again. His steps were careful but confident. He walked to the center of the room without hesitation. His fingers brushed over the wooden rails, tracing shapes and patterns he could now see. For the first time, some of the officials in the room could not hide their astonishment. He described objects, colors, and faces with a precision that left murmurs spreading across the benches. But the court was not satisfied. Evidence must be tangible, the lead prosecutor insisted, pounding the table. A story of a boy seeing does not prove a miracle. It does not prove your claims. Eliam's voice was calm, steady, almost soft. I never claimed to be the source of this light. I only prayed. God is the source. Ask him, and you will see. A young officer who had grown curious, perhaps even inspired, slipped quietly to Eliam's side after the session. He whispered, almost nervously, I have seen what he sees. How can you explain it? Eliam smiled faintly. Some things are not explained by knowledge alone. Some things are seen only with the heart. Outside the courthouse, Maryam and others who believed in Eliam began to gather in small groups. They could not speak loudly, Fear of the authorities was real and immediate. But they could pray silently. They could watch. And they could hope. Word of the blind boy's healing had ignited something far larger than anyone expected. A quiet courage in the hearts of those who had felt powerless for too long. Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, tension turned into conflict. Some officials began to argue among themselves. Could they punish a man for praying quietly? Could they ignore the boy's recovery? Could they stop something that seemed larger than law, larger than fear itself? The room was heavy with indecision, and every second stretched longer than the last. Late in the day, an unexpected figure entered. Drive. Samir al-Hakim, a well-respected physician who had examined Yusef months earlier. He had been hesitant to speak, but something about the boy's newfound sight could not be denied. I cannot explain it medically, he said firmly. I see only one thing. The boy's sight is real. Whether you call it miracle or coincidence, it is undeniable. His voice shook the air. The courtroom fell silent. Some officials exchanged nervous glances. Others clenched their fists. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. People outside whispered prayers. Some crossed themselves quietly. Some simply stared at the sky, hoping for justice. And in that silence, something shifted. The idea that fear alone could rule over truth began to falter. That night, Eliam lay on the thin mat again. He closed his eyes and whispered prayers not just for himself, but for those who feared, for those who doubted, and for the boy who could now see. Somewhere outside, Yusef laughed softly, running his hands over shapes and colors, testing his vision, marveling at the gift he had received. Maryam held his hand tightly. He gave you light, she whispered. And no one can take that away. Yusef nodded, understanding more than words could express. Inside the walls, chains of fear were being tested. Outside, hearts were being stirred. And above it all, a quiet question hung in the air. When light touches darkness, what can the darkness do to stop it? The story was about to reach its most dangerous, most revealing moment. And no one, neither officials nor citizens, would forget what came next. The day of the final judgment arrived with a heavy, almost unbearable stillness. The city seemed frozen, as if every street, every house, every silent witness was holding its breath. People whispered prayers quietly behind closed doors. Merchants paused in the market. Children stared at the courthouse windows, and Maryam held Yusef close, her heart pounding like a drum she could not control. Inside the courtroom, Eliam Farouk stood tall, calm, and steady. His hands were folded, his eyes clear. Around him, officials shuffled papers nervously. They had spent days trying to understand, trying to explain, trying to control something that could not be controlled. Every witness had spoken. Every testimony had been heard. Yet the verdict remained uncertain. The judge entered, his face unreadable, and the room fell silent. He spoke slowly, carefully, as if weighing every word against something larger than the law itself. Eliam Farouk, he began, you have been accused of performing unauthorized religious practices. But the evidence is unlike anything we have faced. The boy, Yusef, sees. People testify. Medical examination confirms his condition has changed. And yet, no crime was committed in intent. You did not force belief. You did not harm anyone. Eliam listened quietly. His heart did not race. He had prepared himself for fear, for chains, for silence. But hope now, quiet and persistent, began to stir in his chest. The judge continued, his voice softening, almost human. In light of these facts, this court finds no legal grounds to punish you. You are free to go. For a moment, no one moved. The silence that had held the city so tightly seemed to break like glass. Relief, disbelief, and awe mingled in the room. Maryam's hands trembled as she clutched Yusef. The boy's eyes sparkled brighter than ever, reflecting the sunlight that poured through the tall windows. Outside the courthouse, news spread quickly. People whispered and stared, unable to believe what they were seeing and hearing. A man had been released, unpunished, after being accused of nothing but kindness, faith, and prayer. And though fear had been strong, courage had been stronger. Eliam walked out slowly, his eyes taking in the city he had helped, the people who had watched quietly, the hearts that had been touched by something unseen. Maryam ran forward, tears flowing freely, and embraced him. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. For Yusef, for us all. Yusef ran toward Eliam, laughing, the first free, unafraid laughter he had ever truly known. "I can see," he shouted. "I can see everything," and in his voice was pure joy, bright and unshakable. Eliam knelt and placed his hands on Yusef's shoulders. "You were always meant to see," he said softly. "And now you do. Never forget it." The city watched as the story spread. People who had whispered in fear now whispered hope. A simple prayer, quietly spoken, had brought change. A young boy's eyes had seen light, and a man's courage had faced chains, and won. Fear had been strong, but faith had been stronger. And the hearts of those who believed, even quietly, had grown braver. That night, as the sun set, Maryam, Yusef, and Eliam sat together quietly. The city glimmered with lights, and somewhere in the distance, the soft hum of life continued, unaware of the miracle it had witnessed. Eliam spoke softly, almost to himself. "Miracles are not ours to claim. They are God's. We are only instruments, willing hearts. And when we are willing, even quietly, light can reach the darkest places." Yusef held his sister's hand, and for the first time, they felt safe, free, and unafraid. They had seen it. Light in darkness, courage in fear, hope in despair. And their hearts knew, forever, that no one could ever take it away. The story of Eliam Farouk and the boy who could see became more than just a tale. It became a quiet legend, whispered through the streets, remembered in hearts, and passed on quietly from one generation to another, a reminder that courage, kindness, and faith could shine brighter than fear, and that even a single prayer could change the world. Summary. In a quiet city in Saudi Arabia, a humble man named Eliam Farouk quietly prayed for those in need. When a blind boy, Yusef, miraculously regained his sight after Eliam's prayer, the news spread quickly, drawing the attention of authorities. Accused of performing unauthorized religious practices, Eliam faced fear, interrogation, and a tense trial. Yet through courage, faith, and the unwavering truth of Yusef's healing, Eliam was ultimately freed, and the boy's gift of sight remained untouched. This story is one of quiet courage, hope in the face of fear, and the unstoppable power of faith and kindness. Moral lesson. True courage is standing for what is right, even when the world around you fears or misunderstands you. Faith and kindness, even when practiced quietly, can inspire change and bring light to the darkest places. Miracles may not always be dramatic or proven, but the impact of love, hope, and prayer can be real and life-changing. Fear may try to control hearts, but hope, faith, and courage are stronger and can never be chained. The end.